This is the Future of Information of the program in Science, Technology, and Society at Stanford University. Scientific research has an enormous impact on modern society, with its effects felt in many aspects of our lives. But in the past several years, many scientists have become afflicted with a serious case of doubt in the very institution of science. Modern science is being undermined by perverse incentives that result in bad science. The good news is that there is increased attention around the problems of modern science, which has resulted in a period of introspection, and the result should yield stronger scientific institutions. First of two lectures, I aim to illustrate some of the challenges and perverse incentives that scientists across fields face, as a starting point for a deeper look at the dysfunction in modern science. The place to begin is right where the first perverse incentives start to creep in: the money. Scientists need money to do their work, and funding is a perennial obstacle. The agencies that allocate research funding have more influence over trends in scientific research than any other entity in the system. They can set aside funds for research in specific fields. They can favor one kind of research over others, for example, basic research over applied research. They can favor certain methods or types of research institution, and they can decide to rank grant applications on criteria other than the quality of the scientific question and approach. Research funding is also increasingly in short supply. In the United States, the largest source of funding is the federal government, and that pool of money has been plateauing largely for years, while young scientists enter the workforce at a faster rate than older scientists retire. With research funding flat or shrinking in many fields, increased competition for research funding can influence the kind of research undertaken, often to support fundable or predictable science, rather than to motivate and stimulate science that may be risky or revolutionary. A National Bureau of Economic Research working paper found that, on the whole, truly unconventional papers tend to be less consistently cited in the literature. As we see in this Nature paper, interdisciplinary research has consistently had lower funding success. Scientists and funders increasingly shy away from this form of research, preferring short turnaround, safer papers. But most academics cannot rely on university funding alone. So science, if you ask any academic, has increasingly become a constant cycle of applying for grants to generate data, to publish in manuscripts that form the basis of the next grant application. Success rates vary enormously depending on the country and the field. As we see here, the proposal success rate for NIH-funded grants is about 18.3% of submissions. This problem is exacerbated by incentive systems that focus on the publication of research outputs, the imperative to publish or perish, that places pressure on labs to publish lots of papers, and as a result breeds conflicts of interest and encourages scientists to overhype their work. When independent, government, or university funding sources dry up, scientists may feel compelled to turn to industry or interest groups eager to generate studies to support their agendas. It's not hard to find examples of scientists accepting grants from sources that have a financial stake in their field of study, while failing to make clear the nature of the relationship. Much of nutrition science, for instance, is funded by the food industry, which one would think would be an inherent conflict of interest. The vast majority of drug clinical trials are funded by drug makers. Studies have found that private industry-funded research tends to yield conclusions that are more favorable to the sponsors. Then there is the case of the sugar industry and its relationship with some Harvard University scientists. In the 1960s, the sugar industry paid scientists to play down the link between sugar and heart disease and promote saturated fat as a culprit. The internal sugar industry documents, discovered by a researcher at the University of California, San Francisco, and published in the Journal of the American Medical Association's Internal Medicine, suggests that 5 decades of research into the role of nutrition in heart disease, including many of today's dietary recommendations, may have been largely shaped by the sugar industry itself. The documents show that a trade group called the Sugar Research Foundation, known today as the Sugar Association, paid 3 Harvard scientists the equivalent of about $50,000 in today's dollars to publish a 1967 review of research on sugar, fat, and heart disease. The studies used in the review were hand-picked by the Sugar Group, and the article, which was published in the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine, minimized the link between sugar and heart health, and cast aspersions instead on the role of saturated fat. Even though the influence peddling revealed in the documents dates back nearly 50 years, more recent reports show that the food industry has continued to influence nutrition science. Take this example from 2015, where a New York Times article revealed that Coca-Cola, the world's largest producer of sugary beverages, had provided millions of dollars in funding to researchers who sought to play down the link between sugary drinks and obesity. Other reports found that candy makers were funding studies that claimed that children who ate candy tended to weigh less than those who did not. In a statement responding to the JAMA Journal report, the Sugar Association said that the 1967 review was published at a time when medical journals did not typically require researchers to disclose their funding sources. And it's true, the New England Journal of Medicine did not begin to require financial disclosures from authors until 1984. Disclosure matters because when a special interest sponsors research, that research is likely to produce results that are in favor of the sponsor. This is not opinion. It's a scientific conclusion based on studies of published research on drugs, devices, tobacco, and chemicals. For instance, in this 2006 study, published in the American Journal of Psychiatry, examined every publicly available trial funded by the pharmaceutical industry for 5 antipsychotic drugs. The paper found that 9 out of 10 published studies concluded that the best drug was the one that was sold by the company that was funding the trial. So we're left with a question. How do we address the problems resulting from the influence of money on the objectivity of science? There are some ideas out there to minimize conflicts of interest from industry funding. Recently, in a provocatively titled article published in PLOS Medicine, Stanford epidemiologist John Ioannidis suggested that pharmaceutical companies ought to pool the money they use to fund drug research to be then allocated to scientists who have no exchange with industry during the design and execution of their studies. This way, scientists could still access funding for their work that was crucial for drug approvals, but without the pressures that can skew their results. In the next lecture in this series, we'll look at another set of factors that can negatively influence the outcome of science, that of perverse academic incentives.